Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a really fascinating exploration, I think, right into the heart of Catholic Church history. The Papal Conclave.
Yeah.
These events, they're pivotal moments where, successors to Peter are chosen. They really shape the Church's direction.
Absolutely. And for us as Catholics, obviously, these elections hold such profound significance. It's this blend of tradition, faith, and also, let's be honest, a very human decision-making process.
Totally. And in this deep dive, we're going to zero in on 10 of the most, surprising papal election results throughout history.
Right. We've looked at a whole range of sources, everything from the Catholic Encyclopedia, which is incredibly detailed, to contemporary news reports across different eras.
Trying to uncover those unexpected twists, maybe some political intrigue, and, what many believers would see as the hand of providence, or perhaps just human nature at play.
Exactly, because while we have this image, don't we, of the cardinals, solemn procession, locked conclave,
Your ritual.
the reality of how popes actually got chosen has often been, far less predictable.
Okay, so let's jump in. Our first big surprise. Pope Celestine V, way back in 1294.
Yeah, Celestine V. What's truly remarkable here is just how improbable it all seemed. The papacy, the Holy See, had been vacant for over 2 years.
2 years is a long time.
A huge gap. And the College of Cardinals was just completely deadlocked. You had the powerful Orsini family faction versus the Colonna family faction, just gridlock.
Okay.
Then, seemingly out of nowhere, they elect Pietro Angelieri. Now, he's an 80-year-old hermit.
An 80-year-old hermit.
Living this life of prayer, solitude up in the mountains.
Yeah.
And get this, he wasn't even a cardinal.
Wow. A complete outsider. For Catholics, that must have felt almost like something from the early days of the Church.
It really does. And our sources suggest this really unexpected choice was partly fueled by a prophecy, apparently from Pietro himself, telling the cardinals they needed to act or face divine judgment.
Really underscores the desperation they must have felt, right?
Oh, absolutely. And you also can't ignore the political side. King Charles II of Naples had quite a bit of influence on this, quote, simple old man, as some accounts call him.
Right.
But Celestine V, despite his piety, he was just overwhelmed. The politics, the administration of the papacy, it wasn't his world. He missed his old life.
Which led to something just completely unprecedented in papal history, didn't it?
It did. After only 5 months, Celestine V decided to abdicate, to resign.
A huge shock for Catholics at the time, surely. It set a precedent, even if it's rarely been used since, for a pope actually stepping down. What did that signal, do you think?
That's a really interesting question. His resignation, it paved the way for Boniface VIII, but Boniface, fearing maybe a schism because this had never happened before, he actually had Celestine imprisoned.
No way.
Yeah. And famously, Dante puts Celestine in his Inferno, for the Great Refusal, shows you just how massive the impact of this surprise election and resignation really was.
Okay, so from a hermit pope to one known for crusades. Let's jump ahead slightly to 1271. Pope Gregory X. This one stands out for a very different reason.
Yes, the sheer length of the election.
Right.
We're talking nearly 3 years. From 1268 to 1271, the cardinals were stuck in Viterbo. Couldn't agree.
3 years. As Catholics, we think about seeking God's will, but imagine the human frustration, the deadlock, for that long.
Exactly. And again, it was mainly the French versus the Italian factions. Neither side could get that necessary 2/3 majority.
And this is where the actual word conclave comes from, isn't it? Meaning with key.
Precisely. The local authorities literally locked them in. Apparently, they even started reducing their food rations to force a decision.
Wow. Extreme measures.
They really were. And the compromise they finally reached was just extraordinary. They elected Teobaldo Visconti. Now, he was an archdeacon, not a priest, not a cardinal.
Okay.
And incredibly, he wasn't even there. He was away on crusade in the Holy Land.
You're kidding. Elected pope while on crusade. That's almost unbelievable. Talk about God working in mysterious ways.
It really is. Of course, the big powers, France, Naples, they were pushing behind the scenes for some resolution. They needed the vacancy filled.
So what happened when he found out?
Well, it took weeks for the news to even reach him. He had to travel back. But once he became Gregory X, he acted decisively. And this is key for us as Catholics, I think.
How so?
He saw the problems this long deadlock caused. So at the Second Council of Lyon in 1274, he established strict conclave rules, locking the cardinals in, limiting food over time, basically the foundation of the modern system we know today.
So a surprising, drawn-out election, directly led to the rules meant to stop that happening again.
Fascinating. Okay, let's fast forward. 1378. Pope Urban VI, different kind of pressure this time, right?
Oh, yes, very different. This is right after the papacy returned to Rome from Avignon.
The Avignon captivity was over. Exactly. But most of the cardinals were still French. The people of Rome, however, were absolutely insistent. They wanted an Italian pope. Or at least not another Frenchman.
You can imagine the tension. Fear of unrest, I suppose. For Catholics, then, church unity must have been paramount after the Avignon period.
Absolutely paramount. And that fear wasn't unfounded. Sources talk about a very vocal, even violent mob surrounding the conclave shouting for a Roman or at least an Italian pope.
Imagine being a cardinal inside that, trying to discern spiritually with that kind of physical threat right outside.
It must have been incredibly intense. And in that pressure cooker, they pretty hastily elected Bartolomeo Prignano, the Archbishop of Bari. Significantly, he wasn't a cardinal either.
Another non-cardinal.
Whoa.
Wow. He was the last one, right?
He was. And it seems pretty clear this was a compromise driven largely by that fear, by the pressure from the streets.
A compromise, though, that went badly wrong, didn't it? The Roman people got their Italian, but Urban VI, no, his leadership wasn't exactly smooth.
Problematic is putting it mildly. Sources describe him as harsh, authoritarian, erratic even. Very quickly, many of the cardinals who elected him regretted it deeply.
What did they do?
Just months later, a group of them declared his election invalid. They claimed they'd only voted for him under duress because of the mob.
Right.
And then they elected another pope, Clement VII, and boom, the Great Western Schism.
40 years of division. Rival popes. Imagine the confusion and turmoil for ordinary Catholics across Europe.
It was devastating for the church's prestige and unity. So this surprise election, born from external pressure, triggered one of the biggest crises in church history. Really highlights that delicate balance, doesn't it? Human factors, divine guidance.
Absolutely. Okay, shifting gears again. Let's jump to the Renaissance. 1522, Pope Adrian VI, another kind of surprise.
Yes, this time it's about breaking the Italian mold. The conclave was deadlocked again for weeks. You had the French-aligned cardinals versus those supporting the Holy Roman Emperor.
And they couldn't agree on any of the Italian candidates, even prominent ones like Giulio de' Medici.
Nope. The major powers had huge stakes in who became pope then. It was gridlock.
So what happened?
Then Cardinal de' Medici himself makes this stunning proposal, Adrian of Utrecht. A Dutch cardinal, a respected theologian, but he was serving as governor of Spain for Emperor Charles V.
It wasn't even in Rome.
Not even in Rome.
Wow, a Dutchman. After, what, over 200 years of Italian popes? In the middle of the Italian Renaissance, that must have been a massive shock.
Huge shock. He was seen by many Italians as this foreign barbarian from the north. It was clearly a geopolitical compromise reflecting Emperor Charles V's power. The cardinals basically looked outside the usual Italian pool to break the stalemate.
I read Adrian himself wasn't exactly thrilled.
Reportedly reacted with real trepidation, yeah. And his papacy, though short only about 20 months, was significant.
How so?
Well, he was a reformer at heart. He tried to clean up the Roman Curia, tackle some of the corruption criticisms, and also address the Protestant Reformation, which was really gaining steam.
But being an outsider
made it tough. He faced a lot of resistance in Rome. His reforms didn't get very far. But his election was a major moment, showing the papacy wasn't always going to be an Italian affair. He remained the last non-Italian pope until, well, much later, 1978.
Foreshadowing indeed. Okay, let's move into the 20th century. 1903, Pope Pius X. This one involves something quite dramatic, right? Secular interference.
Yes, the last gasp of an old power. Cardinal Mariano Rampolla, who had been Secretary of State under the previous Pope, Leo III, was the clear frontrunner, highly respected, experienced.
Seemed like the logical choice.
Looked that way. And then, boom, Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria-Hungary used his imperial veto, the Jus Exclusivae, to block Rampolla's election.
A veto by an emperor. In 1903, why?
The stated reason was that Rampolla was seen as too pro-French. For Catholics witnessing this, it must have been a jarring reminder of how tangled church and state could still be.
Threw the whole conclave into chaos, I imagine.
Completely. With Rampolla suddenly out, the cardinals had to pivot. And they turned, surprisingly, to Giuseppe Sarto, the Patriarch of Venice. He wasn't really considered a top contender before the veto hit.
And his reaction?
Quite emotional, apparently. Sources say he wept, initially refused the office, felt totally unworthy. It took a lot of persuasion from the other cardinals for him to finally accept.
became Pius X, and his papacy ended up being quite significant.
Very significant. One of his first major acts, abolishing that secular veto power forever, no more emperors interfering in papal elections.
Good move.
And he also initiated major liturgical reforms, started the huge project of codifying canon law. So this election, triggered by a surprising political bloc, led to a pope who really shaped modern Catholic practice and law.
Fascinating how that works out. Okay, next up, 1914. Pope Benedict XVI. The context here is stark.
Extremely stark. The Conclave convened just as World War I was erupting across Europe.
Imagine that. Gathering to elect a spiritual leader while the world descends into this unprecedented conflict. The weight of that moment for Catholics must have been immense.
It truly must have been. And the College of Cardinals itself was somewhat divided, reflecting different perspectives. Then, rather surprisingly, they elected Giacomo della Chiesa, the Archbishop of Bologna.
What was surprising about him?
He'd only been made a cardinal 3 months earlier. He wasn't one of the established frontrunners at all.
Only 3 months a cardinal.
Wow. Elected pretty quickly, too, after just 10 ballots over 4 days. They bypassed some better-known figures. It seems the cardinals felt in that moment of crisis, they needed someone seen as perhaps more neutral, diplomatic.
A wartime compromise.
Exactly. And Della Chiesa, taking the name Benedict XV, really leaned into that. He dedicated his entire pontificate to humanitarian work, tireless peace efforts during the war. He earned the nickname the Peace Pope.
So his unexpected election really provided the Church with the kind of leader it needed at that exact historical moment.
It certainly seems that way. A focus on neutrality and diplomacy when the world was tearing itself apart.
Right, moving into more recent memory for many, 1958, Pope John XXIII. The expectation was different, wasn't it?
Very different. Most people expected a prominent Italian cardinal to succeed Pius XII. The names most often mentioned were Giuseppe Siri, seen as more conservative, or Giacomo Lercaro, seen as more progressive.
And instead,
the cardinals surprised pretty much everyone by choosing Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli, the Patriarch of Venice, became John XXIII.
And he was quite old, right? Seen as a placeholder.
Exactly. He was 76, widely viewed as an elderly, transitional figure, a compromise candidate who probably wouldn't rock the boat too much.
I heard he even bought a return train ticket to Venice before the conclave.
That's the story. It shows how unexpected his election was, maybe even to himself. For Catholics today, knowing what came next is just remarkable.
Because this supposedly transitional pope did something monumental.
Monumental is the word. He convened the Second Vatican Council, Vatican II.
This decision, along with his warmth and pastoral approach, ushered in arguably the most transformative period in modern church history.
Reshaping liturgy, the church's relationship with the world.
Everything. It's just an incredible example of how, well, God's plan perhaps can unfold in ways no one sees coming. The caretaker pope became the great reformer.
Amazing. Okay, now 1978, a really unique year. 2 conclaves, 2 surprises. Let's start with August. Pope John Paul I.
Right, the first papal election in 15 years following Paul VI's death. And it was surprisingly quick. Cardinal Albino Luciani of Venice elected after just 1 day. 4 ballots.
And he wasn't the front runner either.
He was seen as a potential compromise, maybe, if the main candidates deadlocked. But his election so fast was definitely a surprise to many Vatican watchers.
The speed, yes, and also his choice of name, John Paul I. That was unprecedented, taking 2 names. It was. Signaled continuity, didn't it? John III, Paul VI, Vatican II, continuity, reconciliation. And for Catholics, his personality, that humility, the gentle style, the smile, was immediately appealing.
The smiling pope?
Exactly. But then, the tragedy. Only 33 days later, he died suddenly. Left the church stunned, mourning, and facing another conclave just weeks later.
Which brings us to the October 1978 conclave. And arguably one of the biggest surprises of them all, Pope John Paul II.
An earthquake, really. Just weeks after John Paul I's death, the cardinals elect Karol Wojtyła from Krakow, Poland.
First non-Italian pope in 455 years since Adrian VI, way back when.
And at 58, the youngest pope in over a century, his name just wasn't really on the radar in most pre-conclave speculation, which was still focused on Italian candidates like Siri and Benelli.
It must have felt like a thunderbolt for the church. A pope from Poland. From behind the Iron Curtain.
Absolutely. The symbolism was immense. It broke centuries of Italian dominance, sure, but it also powerfully reflected the church's growing universality, its global nature.
Acknowledging the strength of the church outside Western Europe.
Precisely. It marked a completely new era. And his pontificate, of course, was incredibly long and influential. His role in communism's fall, his global travels. For Catholics, it was a defining period.
Yeah.
His election was truly transformative.
Definitely. Okay, let's come to our final surprise, the most recent one on our list. 2013, Pope Francis. This followed another shock, Benedict XVI's resignation.
Yes, Benedict's unexpected resignation set the stage, and going into that conclave, many people, including Vatican analysts, thought the focus would be on European or maybe North American cardinals. There was talk about the need for curial reform.
And Jorge Mario Bergoglio of Argentina.
Wasn't really considered a front-runner by most. He was 76, respected for his pastoral work, but the attention was elsewhere. So his election as Pope Francis was a genuine, complete surprise to many.
And so many firsts. First Pope from Latin America.
Right.
First from the Southern Hemisphere. First non-European in, what, over 1,200 years?
Since Pope Gregory III, a Syrian in the 8th century.
Yeah. And the first Jesuit Pope, too. For Catholics, these firsts really signaled something significant, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. A clear shift in the Church's, you could say, center of gravity towards the global South, where Catholicism is growing rapidly. It reflected a desire for maybe a different style of leadership, a renewed focus on the basics of the gospel.
And his emphasis from the start on humility, simplicity, social justice, the peripheries.
Exactly. That focus on mercy, on outreach to the marginalized, has really defined his papacy and resonated with many Catholics worldwide.
So looking back across all 10 of these surprising elections, what themes jump out? For us as Catholics, what connects these moments?
Well, you definitely see the recurring theme of political maneuvering, don't you? External pressures, internal factions.
Yeah, the human element is always there.
Always. And you see how deadlocks, times when the human element seems stuck, often lead to these totally unexpected compromise candidates who then go on to have a huge impact.
Like John's 23rd.
Exactly. Or Gregory X, whose long election led to the conclave rules. And then there are those moments that just feel different, where many believers might sense, the Holy Spirit intervening in a surprising way.
Right. And what's truly amazing is how these unforeseen outcomes have just profoundly shaped Catholic history, often in ways no one could have predicted at the time.
It really underscores that even within this very structured, very prayerful process of a conclave, designed to discern God's will, the unexpected can happen. The human factor, maybe divine surprises, they play a huge role in choosing the Church's leader.
Which kind of leaves us and you, our listener, with a final thought, doesn't it? Thinking about all these historical surprises, what might future conclaves hold?
Yeah, what kind of leader might the Church need for the challenges and opportunities coming up? It's this fascinating intersection, isn't it? Our faith, our history, and that enduring possibility of the unexpected guiding the way.